Hello to everyone and welcome to our explanatory meeting, our breakfast background on Ukraine. It's our third meeting where we, as an independent local media, invite really prominent persons of Ukraine, mainly intellectuals and people who know Ukraine much deeper than the rest of us, and we try to have these open conversations with journalists from all over the world to explain Ukraine and to understand more also your questions about it. Today we have invited really very interesting people. First of all, we have Miroslav Maринович, who is the Vice Rector of Ukrainian Catholic University and former political prisoner of the Soviet Union. We also have Bogdan Tiholоз, who is a cultural critic and the writer, publicist, and also had a lot of experience in academic environment, including journalism. And I would like to start with Miroslav Maринович. Just a few words about Mr. Maринович, who is Vice Rector of Ukrainian Catholic University and also social activist, co-founder of Amnesty International Ukraine and a founding member of the Ukrainian Helsinki Group. Mr. Miroslav is one of the leading, I would say, persons in Lviv and Ukraine who knows everything about our civil society, about the strengths of Ukraine, which we sometimes forget. And I would like to have these conversations more around this, first of all. So we had, a few days ago, we had a meeting here with Sviatoslav Vakarchuk, prominent Ukrainian rock star, and also a prominent Ukrainian and American historian, professor of Harvard University, Serhiy Plokhy. And they spoke, Mr. Plokhy spoke about civic identity of Ukraine. Mr. Maринович, how do you feel the civic identity of Ukraine and what the world sometimes doesn't know about it?
Thank you. Hi, everyone. My understanding of Ukrainian identity is based on my life experience. I was witnessing many periods of Ukrainian history, and I may say that Ukrainian identity is not homogeneous, not uniform. It's mosaic. It was the tragedy of Ukrainians in the past, because at the time when imperial uniformity was at the center of global attention, and those countries who were able to produce such empires were most powerful, Ukrainians didn't have a chance to organize their own empire because they were fragmented, they were in a mosaic status. Now, the situation is slowly changed because we entered the civilization where the main model is unity in diversity. And now we are able to produce some form of unity because we may preserve our diversity, but at the same time to be united. And you see now the nation that started to find their modus vivendi, its modus vivendi at the beginning of the 90s. And it's interesting to see how we are approaching the win-win model, and we are trying to get rid of win-lose model in our inner life. Because at the beginning, we were competing who is better Ukrainians, in the East or in the West. Now we understand that we are approaching the system where all people are important, and we understand that having this common round table and feeling equal, we may produce the so-called effect. I forgot. So we may produce the united effect that will be will enrich our society. So, but you may imagine that to consolidate the nation that has such plurality of sub-identities, it's a difficult task. So in the normal status, it's very difficult to find this unity, to find this one vector of our action. It's very difficult. That's why some nations outside looked at Ukraine and suggested that, no, probably they are not one nation. There are too many different fragments. And it was very difficult for our governments not to control the country, but to find this way to consolidate the nation. But it's interesting that now, when there is a war, the whole nation is united. It looks like resonance, inner resonance, that at the beginning, before the war, all people were oriented in a different direction and so on. Now we all are united. There is one vector to win the war. That's all. And this is very strange but very important effect. And we witnessed, we experienced this effect during our Maidans. Maidans, probably you know,
Revolution of Dignity in 2014 and
Orange Revolution of the year 2004 and Revolution of Dignity in 1913-14. So again, we had the situation where people coming to Kiev, to the main square, from different regions of Ukraine, immediately found some role in a common task. And again, it was very, very important. I see this model as actually the model that Ukrainians choose voluntarily when they are free. It was the case in our history. For example, the Zaporizhzhia Sich, the military groups on Dnieper River in the 17th century, because it was a voluntary organization of Ukrainians, it had the same structure. There were many hundreds, many hundreds, organized, so they lived their own life, but when there was a goal, you have to go and fight, then all these groups were consolidated. The same picture. And now we can say that horizontals are much more powerful in Ukraine than verticals. And this creates a very interesting difference between Ukraine and Russia. British observer James Sher explained these differences in this following way. Russia has a strong government and weak civil society. Ukraine, vice versa. Weak government, because it's so difficult to consolidate the nation, and strong civil society. Again, it was difficult in our history to be successful when we had horizontals instead of verticals. But now there is an interesting effect. Let me tell you the story. When I have been to the United States in the year 1914, immediately after the annexation of Crimea, after our Revolution of Dignity. I had a floor at the meeting of the National Endowment for Democracy in Washington. It's a board meeting. They were interested in my experience, my analysis of the Maidan, of Revolution of Dignity. I described that and concluded with the excuse, unfortunately, Ukrainians didn't create one single party, as it was the case in Poland with Solidarność. Unfortunately, it's our Ukrainian fault, because we have a historical experience of Ottomanщина, as the inability to have one commander. But Americans smiled and said, no, 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 it's not your fault. It's the sign of our epoch, that now horizontals are more important than verticals. And that's why Occupy movement in New York, umbrella movement in Hong Kong, even Muslim Springs, all these phenomena, including Ukrainian Maidans, have this one feature: strong horizontals and weak verticals. And finally, I'm finishing my introduction. Finally, we have the situation when Ukraine, starting in 1991 from the same point as Russia, both countries are moving in a different direction. Russia is strengthening its verticals. And that's why authoritarian regime is very natural for Russia. For Ukraine, it's vice versa. I cannot imagine one Ukrainian autocrat which would be equally authoritative for all regions of Ukraine. But we are, this is the reason why we are approaching a different goal. It is the reason why democracy is more natural for us. Of course, this democracy is not ideal, and as I told you at the beginning, but still it is a democracy. And we are eager, we want to defend our democracy as you see it now.
By the way, do you know which democracy is ideal?
Yes, good question. And the answer is obvious. No one. Okay.
Getting to the point of understanding Russia more, because you said the difference between Ukraine and Russia, and can you tell us about your experience as a political prisoner? Has anything changed? Because you spent many years in prisons of Soviet Union. while you were also trying to defend as a dissident here Ukrainian independence. Why was it happening at that time, and is it different from or the same from with what is happening right now?
There are different political decorations because we have Russia is independent, so to say. It's not Soviet Union anymore. But one thing is the same, looking from my perspective. I remember my feeling and feeling of my colleagues in the camp, when we saw the Soviet government very strong. It was a period of Brezhnev, very consolidated power, no question of the future of the Soviet Union. The whole countries respect the power of the Soviet Union. But we, being in a prison, felt the smell of death of this country. We were sure that the Soviet Union will collapse, and it did. Few years later, when we were released, it collapsed. Now the situation is very similar. We see Putin, who suggests that his army is the second in the world, nuclear power, and so on. It's biggest center of the world power. But we feel the death of this structure, of this country. I'm sure that Russia will disintegrate in the future. Because now we suggest that the Russian people are a monolith. It's not the case, because at some point, as it was during the collapse of the Soviet Union, at some point, all these subjects of the Russian Federation will say their word, let's say in this way. So this is similar. I'm not afraid about Ukraine as a state, as a nation. I am afraid about people, because so many people suffer and so many people die. But as a state, I'm sure that we will prevail.
Thank you for that. And I will back later with one more question, but let's now turn to our next speaker, Bogdan Tiholоз, who is a Ukrainian literary critic, who is the director of Lviv National Literary Memorial Museum of Ivana Franka. He is a publicist, blogger, and scientist. So, and most important for our today's conversation, the author of a post, or a short op-ed that we published right the night before the invasion in this printed paper, which says, "We will resist, 5 reasons why Ukrainians will win." And we had in this studio Slava Vakarchuk a few days ago, and I just want to show, if we can show a short, his reflection on what he read.
5 reasons, and I love the last one. We will win because we can't lose. And this is the most important. I love it.
Thank you.
Слава Україні!
Героям слава! So I would love to continue on that and to explain more what means we will win because we can't lose. And has anything changed since 5 weeks or 6 weeks afterwards? Because you said that one of the reasons is we defend our own and Putin seeks to seize others. We Ukrainians have no other land where we are at home. Third one is our enemy, no matter how terrible and strong may seem, is a colossus on clay feet, and Russia is a historical anachronism and an example of inefficient public administration. The fourth is Putin is mortal and Ukrainians are immortal as long as they give birth to and raise new Ukrainians in peace or in war, no matter how scary it may sound, and we see it today. And the five, we will win because we can't lose. What is your perception today after these 1.5 months?
По-перше, дуже дякую за запрошення, бо честь бути поруч з такими співрозмовниками.
Very thanks for invasion. It's invitation. This honor for me to be there with these perfect people, speakers.
Я насамперед перепрошую, що я не говорю англійською.
I'm sorry for I'm not speaking English.
Бо не хочу ганьбити гідності цієї мови. Складно, так? Так, але я не буду перепрошувати, що говорю українською.
But I'm not be sorry for I'm speaking Ukrainian.
Бо це мова мого мислення і моєї гідності.
And this language of my mind and this my own language.
Відповідаючи, власне, на запитання Тараса, скажу, що за цей час у моїх поглядах нічого не змінилося.
To answer the question of Taras, for this time, nothing changed in my mind.
Я написав той текст за 10 днів до початку воєнних дій.
I was write this text for 10 days before the war start.
Тому що передчуття війни було, напевно, не тільки в мене, а в нас усіх.
Because feeling of war was not just me, everyone.
І воно було дуже виразним і чітким, це передчуття. Дуже певним, як це ще якийсь синонім добрати. Мені дивно, що цього передчуття не було достатньо у тих людей, від яких залежало прийняття певних політичних рішень. У мене передчуття війни було дуже виразним і чітким, але дивно, що не в усіх воно було настільки чітким, зокрема у тих людей, від яких залежало прийняття політичних рішень.
I have clear anticipation and understanding that the war will be started, and I was surprised that the many people in power and in government didn't have this feeling and understanding.
Я перед тим читав газети, які були напередодні Першої світової війни, і в них було дуже багато того, що вказувало на те, що вона почнеться.
I was reading the press that was issued before the First World War, and that had a lot of indication that the war will come soon, and it was really obvious when you read this press.
Зараз я живу у будинку Івана Франка, в буквальному сенсі в його підвалі, бо мушу берегти ті цінності, які там є.
I'm living now. I'm residing now basically in the house in the home of Іван Франко. Like I'm living there in a literal sense because I need to preserve the values that are there.
Do we have to explain who is Iván Franco? Maybe no. Okay. So yes, maybe we can say a few words.
Один із топ-3 великих українців, туди він входить.
Іван Франко is one of the key figure of the Ukrainian culture.
І цей будинок, в якому я зараз мешкаю, в буквальному сенсі цього слова, перестояв вже 2 світові війни.
And this house I built in it overlived already two world wars.
Я дуже хотів би, щоб йому не довелося стояти впродовж Третьої світової, але я впевнений, що він її перестоїть.
And I would really wish that this house would not have to witness the Third World War, but I'm afraid that will be the case, and the house will see the Third World War, unfortunately.
Я не є жодний філософ, але я просто думаю. І мені здається, що деякі речі треба просто чітко формулювати.
I'm not a philosopher, but I can think, and I think that some subjects, some issues, some problems that they just have to be clearly defined.
І я думаю, що та війна, яка триває, вона була неуникна, її було годі оминути.
I think that the world is going now. It was unavoidable, and there was basically no way we could get around it.
Бо це є наслідок тривалого цивілізаційного протистояння.
This war is the result of the long-term civilization of stand.
А точніше, я б сказав, що та війна, яка триває зараз в Україні, це не скільки війна Росії проти України, скільки війна новітнього варварства проти західної цивілізації загалом.
And in my view, this war is not the war Russia against Ukraine, but this is the war between barbarian mentality with democratic mentality and the system of values as we know it.
Тобто справа не тільки у тому, про що говорив пан Мирослав, у відмінностях між ментальністю українців і росіян.
So the case is not just in difference of mentality between Russians and Ukrainians, but
А справа між векторами їхнього цивілізаційного вибору, векторами розвитку.
But the case is, the heart of the problem is that these nations have chose a different vectors of their development as a nations.
Так, йдеться не тільки про геополітику, йдеться передусім про цінності.
And it's not about geopolitics, but it's about the values in the first place.
Кажучи дуже стисло, для мене цей конфлікт – це протистояння цивілізації свободи і суспільства, будованому на насильстві.
So the long story short, in my view, this conflict is the offstand of the society that was built based on the freedom, and from one side, and on the other side, the society that was built based on the totalitarian oppression.
Насильство видається інколи дуже ефективним способом розв'язання проблем.
At times, violence seems to be a very efficient way to solve the problems.
І я певен, що панові Путіну так і видається, що це найефективніший спосіб.
And I'm positive Mr. Putin thinks exactly this.
Але і вся історія світової цивілізації каже, що так тільки здається.
But the whole history of civilization tells us that this is just a illusion, that this is not the case.
Так, тому що це шлях короткий, але це шлях в тупик.
Because this path is short, but it's path to nowhere, basically.
Я переконаний, що власне наша перемога так само не уникна, як і ця війна. Власне, з огляду передусім на те, що насильство ніколи не буває ефективним в довготерміновій перспективі.
And I'm sure that our victory is unavoidable in the same way how this war was unavoidable, because the violence is inefficient and in a long-term perspective.
Я думаю, що українське суспільство з початком війни, без сумніву, пережило дуже великий стрес.
I think that Ukrainian society with the beginning of war went through quite a big stress.
І цей стрес був характерний не тільки для українців, але й для їхніх сусідів, особливо близьких сусідів.
And this stress was not just for Ukrainian nation, but for our neighboring nations as well, especially close neighboring nations.
Але логіка стресу є така, що він ніколи не триває надто довго.
But the nature of the stress is that it never lasts too long.
І за фазою, коли домінує страх, приходить обов'язково фаза, коли домінує бажання щось робити і шукати сенси.
And the phase where the fear is dominating is usually followed by the phase where the desire to generate the change comes and to make something happen.
І я бачу поруч з собою, перед собою, безліч прикладів того, як українське суспільство, подолавши первісний страх, дуже успішно і високоефективно знаходить сенси і дуже добре робить свою роботу в різних сферах.
And in front of me, I see multiple cases when Ukrainian society, getting over the fear, is able to find a new senses for existence and generate new things and do great stuff and great things and make them happen. And this is very inspiring.
І попри те, що не Україна почала цю війну, я, може, скажу трохи ризиковану тезу і, може, в чомусь і страшну, українці дедалі більше сенсів бачать в тому, що відбувається.
And beside of the fact that it was not Ukraine who started this war, and I might be saying a little bit of tricky thing and controversial thing, but Ukrainians see more and more sense and more the meaning of what is happening.
Бо війна – це не тільки криза і не тільки трагедія, це великий історичний шанс.
Because war is not just a crisis, and it's not just a tragedy, but that's big historical chances as well.
Це шанс на оновлення, на переосмислення і на те, щоб стати сильнішими.
War is a chance for renewal, to rebuild, to rethink and to become stronger.
Натомість, з іншого боку, з ворожого боку, я взагалі не розумію сенсів того, що відбувається. І я твердо переконаний, що ті російські вояки, нога яких ступає на українську землю, бачать дуже мало і дедалі менше сенсів в тому, щоб сюди йти.
While on the other side, on the enemy side, I see less and almost no sense to explain what is happening, and I'm sure that the soldiers who come to Ukrainian land and participate in this war, in reality they see very little sense to explain for themselves participation in this war as well.
І тому для мене це також війна сенсів і нонсенсів.
So for me, there's also a sense, the war of sense and nonsense.
І тому я не маю жодного сумніву в тому, що сенс і мотивація переможуть нонсенс і насильство.
So I have no doubt that the sense and motivation will prevail over the nonsense and violence.
Але для мене і для багатьох, для більшості українців, це не просто порожня фраза. Це не просто слова.
But for me, as for a majority of Ukrainians, these are not just empty words and not just phrases.
Бо цей сенс завжди дуже конкретний.
The sense is always very precise and specific.
Це життя наших дітей, це їхнє право вчитися, право музикувати, малювати, ставати дорослішими.
The sense is in the right of our children to grow up, to get education, to develop, to play music, to create poetry and become adults and live a good life.
Це життя наших батьків і дідів і життя наших внуків і правнуків, яких ми дуже хочемо дочекатися.
It's life of our parents and grandparents and the life of our children and grandchildren that we really want to see coming.
Це наші незакінчені справи, які ми почали до війни і хочемо закінчити.
It's about our unfinished business and our unfinished cases that we started before the war and we are really eager to finish.
Ті будинки, фундаменти, яких ми вже залили, так, збудували, і ті проєкти, які на старті, які ми обов'язково мусимо завершити.
And it's about those buildings, the foundation of which we had built before the war and that we want to continue building after the war.
Та, і в українців немає іншої країни, де вони добудують свої будинки і завершать свої проекти.
Then Ukrainians simply have no other country for themselves to finish building those houses and to finish these projects that were started before the war.
І тому я твердо переконаний, що абсолютна більшість від тих українців, які сьогодні не вдома, повернуться додому для того, щоб зробити те, що вони мають зробити.
So I'm absolutely confident that those Ukrainians who left the country, they will return to Ukraine because they have work to finish, projects to finish and houses to build.
І от саме тому я певен, що ми переможемо.
And that's why I'm confident in our victory.
Дякую.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Tiholoz. And I would just add a few words here about Iván Franko, because you do know everything about him. Like, I think you know about Iván Franko the most out of all Ukrainians. But I would just add a few words that he was a poet, a writer, and a political activist who lived in the 19th and the beginning of the 20th century. And he was a political radical and the founder of the socialist nationalist movement in Western Ukraine. In addition to his own literary work, which we, like all Ukrainians, know it. And he also translated the works of such renowned figures as William Shakespeare, Lord Byron, Dante Alighieri, Victor Hugo, Adam Mickiewicz, Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, and Friedrich Schiller into Ukrainian. So he was both giving a lot from his own intellect to Ukrainians, but also giving, learning us the intellect of, giving us more from the intellect of the world, poets and writers. And along with Taras Shevchenko, he has had a tremendous impact on modern literary and political thought in Ukraine. So it was a very prominent figure. And what is your experience? Because Iván Franko still lived, he died during the World War II, but he lived through that time. What is your experience from learning Iván Franko that is useful for us today and for the world in this situation?
Я, звісно, найменше сподівався цього запитання.
This is kind of the last question I was expecting for.
Та, бо в мене робота і так цілий час говорити про Франка. Бо моя робота і так постійно говорити про Франка.
Because all I do for my job is I talk about Iván Franko all the time, 24/7.
Але як не дивно, це дуже добре запитання.
But that's a very good question at the same time.
Так, тому що Франко це якраз дуже добрий приклад людини, яка дуже свідомо конструювала українську ідентичність саме як європейську ідентичність.
Because Franko is an excellent example of someone who was constructing Ukrainian identity as a European identity.
Тобто той чоловік, у домі якого я живу, дуже органічно поєднував вишиванку українську з європейським костюмом і відкритість до ось численних інших культур, і з розумінням, що вони не заміняють власної.
So this person in a home of whom I live currently was brilliant in combining Ukrainian vyshyvanka with European suit and Ukrainian openness to different cultures, with the understanding that these cultures does not have to substitute each other, but they can mingle and create a beautiful mixture.
В той час, коли українська політична думка того часу блудила у манівцях москвофільства, він дуже добре розумів, що наша ідентичність є органічно європейською.
Back in the day when Ukrainian philosophical thought was deluded in Moscovite illusions, or rather with Moscovite illusions, he was very clear in his thinking that Ukrainian identity is a part of a European society and European world.
Я закінчу лекцію про Франка.
So I'm finishing my lecture on Іван Франко.
Його дуже важливою думкою.
With his very important thought.
Що москвофільство не є суто українським явищем. Це загальноєвропейська хвороба.
Moskvophilism is not just Ukrainian issue as such, is unfortunately the general European disease.
І в сучасній європейській політиці щодо України ми бачили наслідки цієї хронічної задавленої хвороби.
And we see this European disease even in modern Ukrainian politics these days.
And its consequences.
And its consequences, yes.
Та українці зараз платять дуже високу ціну за те, що самі хворіли на цю хворобу і досі хворіють значною мірою.
And Ukrainians paying a very high price for the fact that they were sick with this disease for a very long time, and maybe some of them still are.
І європейські суспільства повинні зараз на нашому прикладі зрозуміти, що якщо вони вчасно не будуть вживати заходів щодо радикального зцілення від цієї хвороби, то вони заплатять свою ціну.
And European societies must, looking at our case, in our example, they must realize that they have to get over and heal of this disease, otherwise they will be affected by it similarly.
Якщо європейські нації і громадянські суспільства і уряди будуть і далі плекати ілюзії щодо Росії як партнера у цивілізаційному розвитку, то ця ціна буде ще вищою, ніж та, яку сьогодні платимо ми.
If European governments and European societies will continue living these illusions about great Russian thought and great Russian society and great Russian culture, whatever, they will unfortunately pay the same price that our society is paying at the moment, and this price is unavoidable for them.
Це добре розумів Франко 100 років тому.
Franco understood this perfectly 100 years ago.
Коли російські солдати прийшли в його дім під час російської окупації Львова, в час Першої світової війни.
He understood that 100 years ago when Russian soldiers came to his house during the Russian occupation of war.
Вони з'їли всі грушки і яблука ще зелені з його саду.
They have eaten all the apples and pears from his garden, even if those fruits were green and not ripe yet.
І викопали вздовж його ділянки садиби рів, які використовували, перепрошую, як туалет.
And they had dig a hole around his home, around his mason, basically, that they use as a, I'm sorry for saying that, but they use it as a toilet.
І це відбувалося в центрі Європи.
And that was taking place in the center, in the heart of Europe.
І щоб такого не відбувалося в інших європейських містах з іншими видатними інтелектуалами, ми повинні разом вживати заходи вже сьогодні.
So to make sure this will not happen in other European cities and with other European intellectuals, we must take action today, and we must to do something to make sure this is not happening.
Щоб російські солдати не грабували наших садів і не робили туалетів із наших обійсть, наших
We
дворів.
must stop Russian soldiers from robbing our gardens and from digging toilets around our homes. Thank you.
And doing much more worse things too. So I think I'm so thankful for your wonderful and great profound speeches, and I think we are ready for the question. Okay, I'll try to translate now, to explain. Українською, так? Що раніше, що вони там поза Україною бачили, здавалося, завжди жили стереотипами, що ми дуже різні, і що схід та. І коли і зараз, будучи в Харкові, видно, як все змінилось, і як люди є вони себе, навіть ті, хто російськомовні, асоціюють себе з Україною і з Західним світом, і що формує оцю ідентичність нашу спільну? Чи це питання мови, чи це питання одної території, чи це питання хліба?
Я коротко відповім. Це питання не тільки мови, не тільки території і не тільки хліба. Це питання цінностей.
I'll try to answer shortly, briefly. It's not the question, just the question of bread. It's the question of values.
Колись, здається, Марк Твен написав «Чутки про мою смерть дуже перебільшені».
I think it was Mark Twain who wrote that the gossip about, or the word of mouth about my death is overrated.
То я скажу, що міфи про українську полярність внутрішню дуже перебільшені.
So I would say the same. The myth about Ukrainian polarity are overrated.
Моє прізвище Тихолоз – це типове козацьке прізвище, і рід мій корінням з Черкаської області, з Надніпра.
My family name is Tiholoz, and that's a typical traditional Cossack family name, and my generation roots back to Черкаси.
Але вся моя професійна кар'єра зроблена у Львові, я тут дуже органічно почуваюся.
But my entire upbringing happened in Lviv, and I feel very organically here.
Я був в різних процесах задіяний практично в всіх українських обласних центрах, включно із Харковом, там, Донецьком.
And I was involved in the processes in almost in every oblast center, including Kharkiv and Donetsk.
І попри всі відмінності, в мене ніколи не було відчуття, що я в Росії.
And besides regardless of all the differences, differentialities, I had never had a feeling that I am in Russia or in the part of the Russian world.
Тому я переконаний, що є дві ключові цінності, які визначають саме українську ідентичність. Це свобода і гідність.
So that's why I'm confident that there are two key values that define Ukrainian identity. It's freedom and that's dignity.
І для українців європейська ідентичність не означає географічно чи політично належати до Європи. Справа навіть не в НАТО і Євросоюзі.
And for Ukrainians, it's not about geographical affiliation or political affiliation. It's not even about NATO and European Union membership.
Справа в тому, що ми є спільнота, яка хоче бути разом і не хоче бути подібною на нашого північного і східного сусіда. Скажу дуже просто.
It's about Ukrainians being a part of that community, a part of that family, and it's about and we have to must be together, and Ukrainians cannot be part of that other family and that other community because we don't belong there.
А на моє переконання, в сучасному світі національна ідентичність – це не сакрум, не святощі традиції минулого, а це формула успіху в сучасному світі.
And I do believe strongly that in our current tradition, sacrum, the identity is not a sacrum, it's not some sacred thing that traces back to generation. This is something that we build our future based on.
Простий приклад про Франка.
A simple example is about Franco.
Франко – це один із основних творців нашої ідентичності.
Franco is one of the founding fathers of our identity.
Але якщо ми його поставимо на п'єдестал пам'ятника і будемо йому поклонятися, це погана формула ідентичності.
But if we will make a monument out of him and we will start worship him, that's a bad example of identity.
А якщо побачимо у ньому свою силу і свого співрозмовника, з яким ми спілкуємося на рівних вільно, так, то це дуже хороший символ нашої ідентичності.
But if we will see our force and our power in them, and we will see him as an interlocutor and someone we can talk daily and as an equal, that's an excellent symbolism of our identity.
І цей приклад може бути масштабований на всі наші внутрішні національні проблеми. Якщо ми бачимо у своїх сусідів з Харкова чи Донецька своїх співрозмовників, ми завжди з ними домовимося. Дякую.
And that example can be upscaled to basically every issue in our society. If we see people from Kharkiv as our not, I don't want to say equals, as our counterparts, as our interlocutors, and someone we can talk to on a daily basis, we will find a common ground always, and we will be good.